it's those kinds of things that that a lot of people don't think about when they're talking about, oh well, we should only listen to chant and Latin in the mass. It's like, okay, but you're reaching such a small amount of people that, and that's great for those people that you're reaching, but it's not like you can't do something else also. It's not either or, it's both and.
Yeah. Hey everybody, what is going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Abraham Salas Show. Before we get to the interview, I just want to make a couple announcements about a couple things. First off, this is actually going to be the second to last episode of season 1. The last episode will air next week, Monday, on November 23rd, 2020. That will be the last episode of season 1, and then we'll come back with season 2 in 2021, and you can check out my social media at the Abraham Salas for when we're coming back and for updates, things like that. 2, if you want to support the show, if you want to support any of my ministries, things like that, find ways to support and get access to exclusive content, you can go to patreon.com/theabrahamsalas for ways to support. So with all that being said, thank you so much for tuning in this week. Here's the interview with Matt. Man, Matt Lewis, how's your day, man? How are you?
I'm good, man. I just came off of a rare morning gig with a school in Houston, a high school in Houston. That is normally would be like a retreat thing, which I've been doing for them for years, but due to pandemic, they're having to get creative and innovate, so we had it in their parking lot, and not only was it a rare morning gig, but it was also a rare audio setup. They actually were more than willing to spend the money to get a pretty decent sound production out there, and they had like line arrays and everything, and
what?
It was maybe a little bit like overkill, but it was, it's always better to have too much than too little.
You blessed worship leader. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I wish.
It was nice. And the thing is we had to spread out a lot. So we were in a parking lot. And so the students were super spread out, and there's probably 220 kids. So we used up a lot of space. So it was good they had that kind of system. But yeah, it was nice to walk into that. I wasn't expecting that, so
that's awesome.
It's nice to be set up nice and stuff before you get going.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. Okay, so Matt Lewis, I know a lot about you. I've known you for 6 years now, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so tell the people, as I told James Perkins when he was on, give us your elevator pitch.
My elevator pitch. Oh man,
it can be rough.
All this ahead of time, so I could think about it. No, it's okay. So yeah, I like to say I'm a teacher by day and a worship leader by night, except for this morning, obviously. I actually teach music at a public school to the little kids, and it's a lot of fun. It's challenging right now, but it's still fun. And then I do as many church music things as I can kind of on the side, although it's more and more almost full-time, it seems like these days, at least keeping me pretty busy, which is great. So I do retreats and conferences and worship nights and all that stuff. I'm based in Houston, just like you are, so friendly competition here. But it's fun to be able to share the space with you for sure, especially as you've gotten older and matured into the position a little bit. But I also do lots of, I guess, just nerdier music things too. I work with Novum Publishing, and I do a lot of the transcription work and a lot of the just the publishing side of things for that publishing group, which obviously is kind of a parent to a lot of us.
Yeah.
Um, and we have close relationships with them, obviously, and it's been great working with them even more closely during this pandemic when gigs have kind of fallen off. We've been able to focus a lot on some kind of more in-house and home-based projects. So that's been fun. And I guess to bring it home with an actual elevator pitch, then I could say that if you want really great, high-quality and reverently selected material for your mass or worship night or adoration, then I'm the guy for you. I take a lot of pride in selecting songs that I think are a great fit for obviously the liturgy, but also the group that I'm playing for. And I like to say that I'm not so good that I won't intimidate, your group to like, oh, I don't want to sing, I just want to listen. I'm kind of that middle area of talent. They're like, oh, if that guy can sing, then I could sing, kind of thing, So, I just like to bring a good energy to, liturgical stuff and worship stuff, and try my best to put my heart and soul into it, and lead people closer to God through music, which is ultimately how I ended up doing it. So.
Snaps.
Thanks.
Very, Matt, beautiful as always. All right, so the reason I want you to do that is I wanted you to do that is because, like, one, you have a lot of experience with, liturgy and stuff like that. Even though, like, you're not a liturgist per se, you've been working with it for how many years now?
12
years. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anybody who might get mad at 12 years of working with liturgy, okay, he's very experienced. He knows what he's talking about, and he's a very intelligent guy. And like I say, you quite enjoy debate sometimes, if not a lot.
When it comes to these things that I know a little bit about or pretend to know things about.
Yeah,
I would say, I agree with that. I would say that, I'm formally trained in music, but I'm not formally trained in liturgy or even theology. All the theological and liturgical knowledge that I have is all comes straight from experience and working with, other usually formally trained people or just well-knowledge people, from working retreats and with different churches and groups and stuff, and obviously different priests as well. And I've been very lucky and blessed to have worked with people that take those things super seriously, and have strong opinions about them. So to where that I've been able to kind of find, I don't want to say like a compromise, because I personally don't believe I'm compromising anything the way I do stuff. Of course, that's probably a pretty regular perspective.
Yeah.
But I've worked with people who are super serious with liturgy and music in the liturgy, and I try to be flexible in the sense that I can kind of tailor it to the group that I'm working with, but I also will always hold the liturgy to a respect in the music that I select and the music that I play with it, that I think has set me apart a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Because like I've seen you work, and I've worked with you before,
Right.
in different ways. Like you were over me when we were both at San Angelo Marici, and I was just a volunteer.
Sure.
And like the way you handled the liturgy and respected it was so beautiful and such a great example for me to see. So
Thank you.
yeah, no problem, man. There's like I think the discussion is getting bigger within the church right now when it comes to music and the mass, and it feels like there's like these like two groups. It's like almost like a political thing. Like there's the left and the right of like what music should be in the mass. Basically, like you're like here's your on one side your charismatic Catholics, and then on the other side are your Latin traditional Catholics. Like they huge love for the Latin mass and things like that. So like there's this, I don't know, it seems like the discussion gets more and more heated as the days go on, and it's not like, violent or anything like that, or people are
No,
like
it's
leaving the
getting
church.
louder.
Yeah, it's getting louder, definitely, and I think
Yeah.
it's a good conversation to have, per se, because
Agreed.
like we want to make sure we're doing it right. We want to, as you say, like respect the liturgy, respect Christ coming into presence, in the mass and things like that. But like, what are you seeing in that discussion? Have you been a part of any of those discussions?
Um, I mean, I guess my perspective is still kind of just like, yes, I have experience, but I don't really get into those discussions all that often.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly because I, sh- I don't like it when things are political, as many people, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I've been in those situations and I've had to kind of, bite my tongue, in certain times. Just because of whoever I was talking to was, my boss or whatever. Um, but I would say that the discussion's getting louder and there seems to be more divide, like many other things going on in America right now. Um, so I think that just kind of contributes to it, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, the conversation is very important to have, and I think that you know, looking down into the world, God seeing us having these discussions about the church, like ultimately, I feel like it's good for him. It's good for us to do, and I think it brings him some delight. Obviously not when we get angry and
Yeah.
resentful about it, but the church is alive because we keep these conversations going. And that's probably like a very grand statement for what it actually is, but
Mm-hmm.
obviously for musicians and liturgical musicians, specifically church musicians, like this is what we do. So if the conversation isn't happening, then are we really continuing to? Oh gosh, I don't even know how to say it. You know what I mean?
Are we continuing to grow? Like, are we continuing to like make
Right.
strides as a
Yes.
church?
Exactly. Are we continuing to move forward and seek and seek a greater truth through what we're doing,
Yeah.
but also just seek the connection that we're trying to make with the people in the churches. There's a big push. When I was growing up, and in high school and stuff, when I really fell in love with contemporary stuff, which is, I mean, that's the whole reason I'm doing what I'm doing now, is because I went to a church that had a huge, contemporary music mass, and had a huge influence on me. And I can talk about this a little bit later, but without that kind of music and that style of music, I wouldn't be here. Like, that's how I got interested. It's
Yeah.
not. I mean, I still love doing it. It's what I still do most of the time, but it's not like I know that's not the only thing that can bring people closer to God. But anyway, my point is, at that time, like, that was a huge push in the church in general, especially here in the American church. And then as I got older and into college and after college and now, you see that this kind of reemergence of even more, or not more sacred, but that sacred style of music, more chant, more traditional, kind of reemerging as being more popular. And a lot of the debate, of course, is centered on, what's appropriate for the mass itself, what's appropriate for the liturgy. And honestly, I wouldn't say that all music is appropriate for liturgy. You know that, because there's things that you and I've worked on together, and you're like, hey, we should do this, and I'm like, no.
Yeah,
and I have
just
my
like that.
reasons and whatever, yeah. But at the same time, when you have these general statements of, old school sacred music, chant, and whatever, and then you have this, people like to call it the guitar mass. It's all about the way it's done, which I believe comes from the intention.
Yeah.
Which I know that people always say, well, my intentions are good. And although that can totally be true on the surface, what I like to really hammer home to anybody I work with, or if I were working in a church right now, the group I was working with, obviously, you know this from working in a group with me.
Mm-hmm.
If the intention doesn't come through in the performance of the mass or the music, that's one thing. But the intention must come through in the preparation of the music.
Mm.
Right? I was formally trained in music, so I kind of had to practice going through college and stuff. Like, that's just something that we were all not only taught to do, but like you had to succeed, to be any kind of bit of successful. And so there's that side of it. But at the same time, it's also, if your intentions are to bring glory to God through your music, as well as respect the importance of what's happening on the altar, then why would you not prepare and do and give your absolute best?
Yeah.
And even for the least talented people that are leading music all over the country, if they can put in time and prepare, as is, I think, required and totally called, we're called to prepare for that if we're called to being a church musician. Then even if you're not super talented or the greatest singer or greatest piano player, like, at that point, your intention has gone deeper than just the surface. If you're putting in that time and that effort, then that's where the intention really shines through.
Yeah.
I think I just answered a really long answer.
No, that's completely fine. No,
I don't know if I went off track, but
no, I love it. So you brought up like how it's done, and there's songs that like you've even told me no, and I was just like, I mean, you worked with me when I was like, one point, I think, I don't know if I was like almost right out of high school or just right out of high school, right? So like, I'm still a really young musician and worship leader, right? But still very early on at that point.
Sure.
And I was just like, why can't we do this one song in mass, right? So when you're looking to pick a song, because you're a contemporary musician, right? So there's more freedom, and we'll go with things like CCLI, or some people might have Worship Now, or whatever resource they have as a contemporary musician. What is, I don't know, your guidelines, or like what screams out to you, do not use a song in mass?
Sure. Yeah. So I've kind of, what I've kind of come to develop, and obviously this is not unique to me, but number one, you have to take into account the actual context of the mass, so, and there's several points to that. Obviously there's the mass as a whole, and what you're doing and sacrificing, or what is being sacrificed and what is being offered, and the Eucharist being at the center of that, obviously. Being a focal point is always great. I would say, to speak super generally, I try to pick songs that are directed toward God, as opposed to directed toward ourselves, which is a big difference between doing music for like a mass and doing music for adoration, right?
Yeah.
When you're at mass, literally the whole focus should be and needs to be on God and what's happening on the altar. So songs that literally don't have a lot of like first person pronouns, me and I, but have more of like you and obviously God or Lord or whatever. I always I try to find those, but it's sometimes it's obviously tricky because there's lots of contemporary songs that kind of do both, which is where you kind of get into the other part of the mass that you have to look for, and that is the moment in mass that the song is being played. What is supposed to be the focus of that moment? Obviously, for instance, the opening song. You're gathering people, you're inviting them in. The focus is on God, but it's also a very communal act. So songs that use we or us are really good, obviously. And then the song for preparation of the gifts, or offertory, that one, I think, is obviously more a little bit. It's still focused on God, but it's also about the offering that you as a person are offering in that moment.
Yeah.
So if there's a little bit of self focus in there, I could see that being, more appropriate there. But then, of course, you have communion, where the focus really needs to be on the Eucharist and the the sacrifice being made. However, communion, as in the name of it, is also a very communal act.
Yeah.
So again, songs we and us and our kind of stuff. And then, of course, the last song, which isn't technically part of the Mass, as people say.
Yeah.
But that's one, going out, sending out, going into mission, spreading the word of God, et cetera, et cetera. Again, of a communal kind of thing. So in general, I pick music focused on God as much as possible. So I was going to try to avoid making a specific reference, but I'll go ahead and talk about it because I know this is one that you and I specifically talked about. And that would be Reckless Love, right?
Yeah.
So
I was thinking about that one.
You asked me a year or more ago. Gosh, it's been...
Yeah, I think it was 2 years. Yeah.
That's crazy. You asked me if we could do Reckless Love at Mass, and I just basically said no. And of course, you and I have a friendship, so it was just like, no, not going to happen. I was joking, but also serious.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, I really like that song. I know there's a whole heck lot of a debate whether or not it's even theologically correct or whatever.
Yeah, even among the Protestant community too, not even
yeah.
just among Catholics. That's...
Right. But taking all that aside, if you look at the words of the song and even the topic of the song,
mm-hmm.
it's about the I, the me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Chases me down.
Fights till I'm found.
Fights till I'm found. Leaves the 99. Yeah, you know what I mean? It's about the person singing it, which is beautiful when you're talking about the relationship you have with God, which is why I have and often have done Reckless Love during adoration. It's truly a song of encounter because God is encountering you, the person, and in adoration, it's about the relationship you have with God. It's you and God in a room, and you're adoring God, but it's a mutual thing. Well, he's not adoring you, but you know what I mean? There's a mutual exchange
mm-hmm.
of conversation, hopefully, there. And so to talk about that relationship in that way, it makes sense to me. But to put that in a Mass where the focus is on me, that's not what Mass is about. Mass is only about God. And obviously your relationship has a part in that. But that's just not kind of the time and place thing, It's not really the time or place to do that. If you want to do that, then go to adoration, or go do it on your own in your room,
Yeah.
In some prayer time, personal prayer time.
Still go to Mass, by the way.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean that to put it concretely, I think that pretty much sums it up. I mean, there's obviously, this is where the challenge is, and this is where I think that experience comes into play a lot as you do it more and more, is you have to find a balance, and it's really hard to do that in a day where things are so polarized.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I'm a very big believer in all things in balance. Obviously, there's exceptions to that because, you have to put God at the first and foremost in your life. But when it comes to something that is a little bit more, what's the word? Subjective.
Yeah.
Like music, right? Subjective? Yeah.
Subjective,
I always get subjective and objective stuff. Subjective, then you have a little bit of leeway. You have a little bit of playing room. It's not like I'm changing, the Eucharistic prayers. There's a difference to that. In fact, I was trying to remember where it was and I couldn't find it. But in Sacrosanctum Concilium, they talk about how there's the parts of the Mass that don't ever change.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's what makes it universal.
Yeah.
But there's also parts of the Mass that change with the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's necessary to literally meet the people where they're at, right? That's why churches in Africa and other places have like liturgical dance, because dance is a huge part of the culture. I was just talking to Stephen Jobert about this a few weeks ago, but like it's a cultural thing, and so God wants to meet us where we're at, and so meeting us where we're at in those ways in our art and our culture is a huge part of bringing people into Mass and closer to God. You know what I mean? And closer to each other, which again is a huge part of the church.
Yeah,
Community.
and that's something I would say as an argument. I think, I mean, you and I obviously have a bias towards like contemporary music in the Mass because we're both contemporary musicians and we both do it. But I would say still that's an argument that I haven't heard from our side, but I've always thought about, and I hadn't seen it written anywhere, or in a document. So say the document again so people know to look up.
Sacro Sanctum Concilium, which is basically, it's Pope Paul VI's writing that he did right after, I think, or basically part of Vatican II or right after Vatican II, that is talking about the liturgy and making the liturgy more accessible, I think. I mean, to be honest, I'm not a professional, or I'm not an expert
you're
on
good.
it. But I know that the sacred music part, there's a huge part in there about sacred music, which is awesome. It's an awesome read, and of course, it's available on the Vatican website. I'm looking at it right now, actually, because I'm trying to find what I was saying. Yeah, Pope Paul VI, Sacro Sanctum Concilium.
Okay.
And there's a lot of debate, obviously, from traditional music people and chant music folks and contemporary stuff about this document. So obviously there's some interpretation that a lot of people have, but
yeah, but
again, I'm not an expert, but
yeah, no,
you know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
You're good. No, it's always good, I say, to like quote someone else, like, which is like why I have like other people on the podcast, because like not one individual knows everything.
Right.
But like I think that's huge because part of the universality of the church is God coming to meet people where they're at and coming to meet a culture where they're at the same time. And like, I mean, I could like we also have different rites in the church, right? Like we have our we have the Roman rite, we have the Syro rite, and we have the which is I think a newer rite, the Anglo rite, the Anglican, coming from the Anglicans coming back,
right?
Things like that, and those are like
no pun intended.
Yeah, those are different cultures coming back, and the Mass being with a different culture, which is so beautiful and so much a part of the universality of the church. And like obviously it's okay for someone not to like contemporary music, right? Like I think I said this in the episode with James, like I'm not a fan of the Gather hymnal, right? Like there's certain songs in the Gather hymnal I like, and I will I love singing and all this, but like the hymnal as a whole, like I'm not about it. If there's a contemporary Mass and a Gather hymnal Mass, I'm going to the contemporary Mass, or I'm going to the Latin Mass. Like that type of prayer might not, in music form, might not speak to someone else.
Sure.
Like there's people, I've talked to some people that just, it's not that they don't agree that contemporary music should be in the Mass, or there shouldn't be this Mass existing with this music, but they just love the Latin Mass and it speaks to them better.
Sure.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And also like on that, like, and I found what I was looking for, by the way, so I'll share that in a minute. But on what you just said, like I think a lot of people that prefer those kinds of the chant masses or whatever, the Latin Mass, or even the Gather hymnal, traditional quote hymn masses, like that's fine. Like you said, they have you have your preference, and that's fine. I would go so far as to say, and this is again a huge generalization, but most churches, I would say, in the country that have a contemporary Mass do not necessarily execute the contemporary music very well. And it
Mm.
kind of goes back to what I was saying about the preparation. Um, and this is not a knock on youth ministers at all, but a lot of times it's the youth minister that is asked to play the music for that mass, especially if they have any musical ability. And even if there is something they like to do or can do well, if they're talented musically, they're also doing a billion other things.
Yep.
So it's like, do they really have time to focus on that? And so having a specific person to do that, I think, goes a long way, because if someone who, I don't like going to contemporary mass, the music sucks, but I like going to this other mass. Have they really ever heard a contemporary mass that was done well?
Yeah.
Have they been able to experience that? You and I have been blessed. We've been blessed growing up in churches that do have great programs. And obviously they exist, but I'd argue that they probably aren't the majority, because of many billion different reasons. But that's what I'm saying. Like, if that is something that you are called into, to lead a contemporary mass, it takes time, and it's not something you can just throw together.
Yeah.
And it's not something that you can think about last minute or even make changes to last minute. You have to be intentional about it, not only in the way you select songs, but actually prepare the songs. There's so many different there's so many different points in that preparation that could lead to failure, which is tough. But that's kind of part of being a musician too, and the thing is, this is probably a whole separate part of this conversation, but what's really tough about that is, because contemporary music is by name contemporary, it's modern, it's actually what people listen to nowadays, whether they turn on their family life radio station, or they listen to just pop music. Unfortunately, because of that idea, everyone is going to have an opinion on it. And that's really hard to grapple with if you're already struggling with picking music or whatever. And so it's also being confident in your own ability. And kind of like, even when you approach me about doing Reckless Love, I'm like, we're not going to do that. Sorry, man. Kind of thing. Like, if someone, you always hear this thing about, well, why don't you send out a survey to the parishioners and see what songs they want to hear? That's a terrible idea.
Yeah, because the parishioners aren't going to take the time. Most of the time, I mean, we should. I mean, the church should, but you want to send out a survey, and I've heard this before too, to parishioners, when 70% of our church doesn't even believe that Christ is truly present in the Eucharist.
Yeah.
Like, seriously.
That's exactly that. They don't really understand what's happening. And so, not everybody, but again, like that is a statistic I've heard too. And so, if you, as the person doing music, really truly understand that and believe that, like, you're going to have a different perspective. And obviously we would argue that you're more likely to be correct, quote unquote,
Yeah, because I mean, you're dealing with it every week in, week out, when you're running a mass every week.
Right.
And at the same time, I would argue, even picking music selection wise, that for a contemporary musician, it's harder because there's so much out there, and who writes most of contemporary music, which this is changing obviously in the industry, quote unquote industry right now, if you want to say that, but like, who writes most of the contemporary music? Not Catholics.
Yeah,
there's very few compared to Protestant contemporary musicians, very few Catholics.
Which brings up another point. When you are selecting music for a mass, and you're looking at Protestant songwriters, you do have to be careful with the words that are said, because ultimately, again, no matter what style of music you're doing, the music still has to be, it still has to be theologically correct, which is really tough. And I would even say, I've had to change words to songs that probably against copyright or something, but like, I'm not going to sing that because it doesn't match up with what we believe. Um, and you have to kind of know the faith well enough to know that too.
Yeah.
And again, that's where the preparation comes into play. You can't just pick, oh yeah, top 40 song from KSPJ and play them in mass. Like, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
For
Don't
a
play
billion
Graves into
reasons,
Gardens in mass. Maybe as an ending song.
I literally just learned that last night.
Oh man.
I was, I'm not using it yet, but I know it's a hit. So I started looking at it and
Yeah.
playing around with it.
It's a fun one.
Let me share this real quick from Sacrosanctum because I did find it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So this is in Sacrosanctum Concilium, chapter 6, which is about sacred music. And it's paragraph 116. It says, the church acknowledges Gregorian chant as typically suited to the Roman liturgy. Therefore, other things being equal, it should be given pride and place in liturgical services. Fantastic. And then it says, but other kinds of sacred music, especially polyphony, are by no means excluded from liturgical celebrations so long as they accord with the spirit of the liturgical action as laid down in Art 30, which is a reference to earlier in the writing. And that one says, to promote active participation, the people should be encouraged to take part by means of acclamations, responses, psalmody, antiphons, and songs, as well as by actions, gestures, and bodily attitudes at the proper times. But the point of that is promote active participation at the proper times. So if you want people to sing and you know that your community enjoys contemporary music, then that's what you need to do, and that's what you need to kind of pull onto. Now, I would say too that it doesn't mean that that's all you have to do. Like, obviously most churches these days have kind of the traditional style, the hymns and stuff. And then they have, most of them have the contemporary stuff too. But talking about, man, I'm all over the place with this.
No, you're good. You're good.
The beginning of what I just said about how chant needs to be kind of first and foremost. Well, it is. That's why it's written in there for the priest to sing. That is chant. So it's not like you should be doing chant in your songs. You certainly can. It'd be great. But there's where the wiggle room is to incorporate other things.
Yeah, and then another point is that this type of music did not exist back then.
Right.
Wasn't even like a thought, probably. Sure. I mean, maybe it was like maybe incorporating like it with like an opera style or something.
Well, at that point, it would be like folky kind of minstrel music,
Yeah.
But what's interesting is, a lot of people in our generation kind of look at the gather hymnal stuff and the hymns that were big in the 80s and all that stuff and kind of like roll our eyes at it,
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting is we also have to be forward thinking in the sense that in 20 years, 20, 30 years, there could be a whole new generation doing that exact same thing about what we're doing now.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, there's like, I will admit that there's some artists from like early contemporary music that I roll my eyes at. I'm not gonna name them by name because I don't want to like throw. I'm gonna sound like such a millennial, but throw shade at them.
And it met a need. Then it met a need, and that's what I mean. Like, we're meeting a need right now, and if this is how people can connect with the mass and with God, then I feel like it's our call to meet that need, or to be used to meet that need.
Yeah.
And I'll actually use this to tie into kind of my conversion story, which isn't really that spectacular, but it's all about music. I fell in love with music before I fell in love with anything else. And I like to say that I decided to do music in some way as my career when I was like 11. And when I got into high school and really found my faith, God used music to reach me, and that's what I was talking about earlier. Like, I went to the church I went to in high school had a crazy awesome contemporary group for their mass, and that's the mass we went to because that's where we had youth night afterward and everything, and it's because of that music that I really fell in love with it.
Yep.
And then
Same.
goes to biblical conferences and same thing. So it's like he used the desire he placed on my heart just to be around music all the time to like I said, to find me and to really pull me into relationship with him. And so I like jokingly tell my wife that music was my first love, and
Oh, man.
her. She's like third on the list. No, not really, but
Oh man,
I mean,
poor Emily.
but you know what I mean? Like it's those kinds of things that that a lot of people don't think about when they're talking about, oh well, we should only listen to chant and Latin in the mass. It's like, okay, but you're reaching such a small amount of people and that's great for those people that you're reaching, but it's not like you can't do something else also. It's not either or, it's both and.
Yeah. Like we keep on saying universal church. So
yeah.
I mean, why not be universal in everything we do? We are already universal in languages. We are already universal in like where we are. We're universal in the fact that we have different rites of the church. I've no idea how many rites, but we all know there's a lot. And we still celebrate the Latin rite and things like that. So why not be universal in the music too? And we keep saying it's how it's done. I mean, like very few people, I would agree with that statement, do it right. Very few people do it right, and that's such a shame. But I would say this is a call to our fellow contemporary musicians and brothers and sisters in Christ to really say guys, we gotta
step it up.
Yeah, we gotta step it up and really pay attention to the liturgy as much as if you're not a director of liturgy, as much as the director of liturgy is and the director of music is at a parish, or as much as someone who is running a Latin mass. Like we have to, in order to do right by God and have this true love for him, we have to be careful with what we're doing for him, because we want it to be, the mass is where heaven meets earth. So
why would we not give every lick of effort we can, even
to people, if you're just a volunteer singer or whatever, or even if you're in the congregation, right? Like that doesn't have this, not even just in music, right? Like, yes, sing to God even if you have the crappiest voice ever. I didn't learn to sing until I was like 16, and even now I'm like, oh, that sounded. We all have our moments, right? But bless God with the voice he gave you. And if you are one of the musicians, step it up. And this is for myself too. It's for all of us. We all got to step it up and try to do better each and every day.
Well, and here's a I guess a serious ultimatum too. It's when you quote unquote perform music in mass, right? You could literally make or break someone's whole, prayerful moment.
Yep.
Because if you do it well and you do it right with intention and you've prepared and you've practiced and all that stuff, you could be the reason somebody finds God, like what happened to me. Or if you don't, you could be the reason somebody says, I can't handle this anymore, I'm not going to mass.
Yeah,
everybody's been there. You go to a mass and the music is subpar, and it's, above all else, it's not that they're not trying, but above all else, it's distracting.
Yep.
And that's a big thing for me too, and I didn't really mention it earlier, and I'm not saying you can't mess up when it's time to actually sing a song and all that kind of stuff. I just mean that's what I mean by the intention too. It's clear when you've prepared or when you've trained for it. It's you're going to be automatically less unless you're cracking notes and buzzing strings and hitting wrong notes on the keyboard and stuff like that. Like,
Oof.
yeah, I mean, everybody knows because everybody looks, right?
Oh yeah,
It's
I
so
remember.
hard to not look, that's
Yep.
I mean, that's what we're called to do,
Yeah,
and we have to take it seriously.
definitely. All right, everybody, that is the interview. Thank y'all so much for watching. There is a segment 2, and that is going to be exclusive content for patrons only. So if you are a patron, go over to Patreon right now to find that exclusive segment for segment 2 of this episode with Matt Lewis. And if you want to go check that out and once again find ways to support so I'm able to keep doing this into next year, things like that, go to patreon.com/theabrahamsalas to find ways to support. And always the biggest thing you can do is pray for me, my intentions, this ministry, and just pray. Yeah. And thank y'all so much for watching. We'll see y'all next time for the finale.